Deirdre, can you tell us a little bit about your background? I know that you're from Australia, if people haven't figured that out yet by the accent. How did you make your way to New York? And tell us a little bit about your entrepreneurial journey.
Yeah, for sure. So I started my entrepreneurial journey almost a decade ago, and it was actually something completely different. So we started with a dessert bar in Sydney. It's called the Chockpot, and we grew that to 5 locations. And then we also opened a few years after that first one. We opened burger restaurants called Stacks on Burgers, and we grew that to 2 locations. And yeah, to answer your question about how did I end up here? So it's kind of, it feels like an aligning of a lot of things, and I'll tell you what I mean. So at around, the end of 2018, I want to say, we found out that one of our store managers of the Chockpot, and he was a store manager of one of our busiest stores. So it was in the heart of the city in Sydney. And we have found out that he had been stealing from us like hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Wow.
And yeah, it was insane. And, I can talk about it very like whatever now, but at the time it was like this huge betrayal, as you can imagine. We were grooming him essentially to become sort of the right hand, almost like the full operations manager across all of our stores. So it was actually quite a big thing at the time, and it took something like that to kind of like snap. So I opened it. I started the business with my then partner, now husband, and it kind of took something like that to happen to be like, is this what we want to be doing? Is this where we want to be heading? Is this what we want to be focusing on? And I've always wanted to work and live overseas. And at the time, I was actually exploring with another co-founder of mine a fashion technology idea. And so I was like, well, what better place than New York City to explore fashion and technology, right? So that was my excuse anyway. So that is how, because we were just like, you know what, let's just do it. At this point, we've just had this big thing happen to us. It's kind of making us question a lot of things and where we want to be. And we were just like, now's the time. Like literally, if we stayed on this path of, growing these businesses, like cool, but is this really what we want to be doing? And yeah, for us, that answer was no. So we pretty much picked up and left, and we got over here 2019.
So what is it that drove your growth from a marketing perspective with your previous businesses?
Yeah, it was, I got to tell you, like, just to put this in context, because I don't think, and entrepreneurs will understand this because, it's so easy to be like, oh yeah, check out this big bit. We grew to 5 locations and this other one, but it was not the easiest journey at all. I mean, brick and mortar businesses is one of the hardest things that you can get into. So we had, because, it costs a lot of money to actually fit out a place, which, by the way, we did not know because we had no background in hospitality. Like that was how naive we were.
Sometimes not knowing is what causes entrepreneurs to be successful, because other people would just never even think of doing that because they just know better.
Right. Yeah, I know. I think that's a thing. If what would I have done differently? Maybe not start a brick and mortar business. But yeah, so we were in debt from day one. We had a lease, the thing is that we had, we were super naive about it all. We knew that we had the bee's knees of our product. We loved our product, and I'm sure that this is a very common thing again for a lot of new entrepreneurs, but we loved our product and we were sure that again we would build it and they would come, right?
Right. Yep.
Yeah,
of course, that's how it always works.
Right, exactly. So we built it and they did not come. So it was months and months and months of like trying to figure this marketing thing out. It's sometimes like, I know better now, but like at the time I was like, marketing was because I also come from a corporate background, and in corporate marketing and banking, by the way. So it wasn't really as big of a thing. It was kind of almost the afterthought rather than the driver.
Yep.
Whereas obviously in entrepreneurship, it has to be the first thing. It has to be almost the only thing that you focus on at the beginning to grow a business.
Once you have the product. Yep.
Yeah, we did not know that. We were fumbling. We were trying to and we had to, like, we were bleeding money, right? Because we had rent and wages and supplies and everything to pay, even though we weren't making very much money at all. And so at the time, it was probably a few, maybe a month or so, 4 or 5 weeks in, one of our staff members, so she was a bit younger than us, she was, up with it. She was like, oh, you should be on this thing called Instagram. And
what year was this? Just because there's some context.
This was 2013. So
okay.
nine years ago.
Yep.
So at the time, Instagram was still, it was still kind of starting. It was still quite nebulous at that time, or nascent. And we were like, oh, okay, sounds cool. But in the back of my mind, I was like, I don't have the time. Like I've got to take photos and I've got to like post, and I'm trying to figure this thing out. And I'm like, you know what? Facebook is enough right now. Like I can barely figure out Facebook, let alone Instagram at that time. But interestingly, we started reaching out to like collaborating with bloggers. So, because I was talking to a mentor of mine and he was like, start actually finding, especially because you're in the food industry, blogging was big back then, like food blogs. So we would be finding, so I was just, okay, cool. Like I find these food bloggers and I just started like emailing them all. And then they were coming in, we had 1 or 2 a week sort of coming in at that time. And I remember having conversations with them and they were like, oh, like, they loved our stuff. And they were like, we'll obviously put up a blog, but like, we're also going to, we just started up this Instagram account. So we're also going to post them there. And I was like, oh yeah, I totally know about Instagram. Yeah. That. And what we found was that more and more, it was like kind of almost that transition point of like blogging really starting to transition into Instagram, like they were all going on there. And Instagram as a platform was growing. So for us, we really found that, working with influencers who were kind of like transitioning off from blogging being their main platform to Instagram, and the growth of Instagram, it was kind of almost the perfect storm for us to really ride that wave.
Did you just get lucky getting there at the perfect storm?
Like, I feel like a lot of it was, I don't know if, I used to listen to a lot of How I Built This, and Guy used to always be, that was his last question, right? Do you think it was like luck and it's always a mix of both.
Yes, of course.
I think things have to align, but you also have to take you have to take advantage of those opportunities aligning. So that was definitely, I think, where we found ourselves, where it was like, yeah, things were aligning because we had no idea, but like none of this was strategic,
right.
I could not have foreseen that it's like, yeah, let's be on this platform and do these things and work with these people. And then this is, you can't really foresee any of that. So I think a lot of it was, we were fortunate to be at the right place at the right time. But obviously we had to put in the work, right? We did have to first find these, influencers to work with, and, more and more, and get more and more of them in. And then also be like, oh, okay, this is a trend. Let's actually let's now actually intentionally take advantage of this platform.
Right.
That's growing. So yeah, it's a mix of both for sure.
You really got swept up in this wave in the early days of Instagram, and with these food bloggers, you really did a lot to reach out to influencers. What impact directly did that have on your business?
Oh, a massive impact. Like to the point, there was I like telling the story actually, because it still actually brings tears to my eyes. But we were not busy at all. And this was like months into it. So there was one Friday night that my husband and I finally were able to take off, and we were at this Japanese restaurant. And we only ever had 2 people working. So it was a Friday night. Like, this is how not busy we were. Friday night, and we only had 2 people working in the store. And we get a call from one of them, and he was like, oh, can you guys come in? I can't explain right now, but you've got to come in. And we were like, has something happened? Like, I don't know, do we not have power? And you're like, what's going on?
Right,
so we're like,
right. Are you flooded?
Yeah, exactly. So we run to the car. We're trying not to drive, run any red lights. And I'm dropping my husband off at the front so I can find parking. And it was the first time that our store was actually packed. Like, we had a line at the time. Like, I never would have in my wildest imagination ever thought that it was possible. Sometimes we like to think it feels like a dream when you're like, oh, I'd love for this to happen.
Yeah.
But, what are the chances of that actually becoming reality? I mean, I don't want to sound pessimistic or anything, but that was what was going through my mind at the time, right? Like, what are the chances of this really happening? But then and there, that was happening. And so for me, when I think back to like, what had we actually intentionally done, it was those things. It was working with people who, and by the way, like, because it felt like at that time that we had become an overnight success, but obviously that's not how it works.
That's never how it works.
Yeah. Exactly.
But was there, but by the way, just to pinpoint that one night, was there something specific that came out at that time? Was there a press mention? Was there a blogger that mentioned it? Was there something that drove it on that particular Friday night? Or was it just accumulation?
It was an accumulation.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it was just like, there was just this, it was like that momentum. It's like that snowball analogy, like rolling down. It's like, it was like one. And by the way, like, Sydney as well is not a huge, a huge place, not like New York City where there's like, I think Sydney has maybe like 1 million people. I don't know, but it's not a big city. And so that's the thing, right? Like, once you start to tap into the Sydney network from a food perspective, everyone's kind of following the same people, like, and so once you see someone mentioning, for example, for us, like the chalkpot, and then you see another person that you're following mentioning chalkpot, and then you see another, like, you're like, well, I have to go try this place now. Like, and that's just how it worked in Sydney, especially. We were just kind of starting to get everywhere. And it wasn't like any big press, like big newspapers. It was literally just these people who just gave up their time and, one evening came in, had some free dessert, took some great photos and posted about it. And that was just what created this snowball effect. So, yeah.
So stepping back as an entrepreneur, how can we look at all the different channels that are out there and identify those that might allow us to have that kind of momentum that you saw from Instagram?
Yeah, it's, and it feels kind of like cliched or trite to say this, but, you do genuinely have to be where your customers or clients are.
Yeah.
Genuinely. I mean, again, we're a young brand. We were definitely targeting, like university, young professional, those coming out of university, just entering the workforce. Like, that was very much our target market. And that was very much who was driving that Instagram growth. And so, it's easy to say, like, now I know that everyone's like, you've got to be on TikTok, and like, it's not, you probably do. And definitely at some point you do, because that's going to become, it's going to become much, much more mass, like the way that Instagram is now. Mm-hmm. But do you need to be on it right now? Maybe not, if your customer client isn't on there. Right. It just doesn't make sense, because then you're putting all this work to create content for what, like, for the vanity metric of like maybe getting thousands of views on a particular video, like, that's not a good use of anyone's time. So it really depends. Yeah.
So there are these kinds of things that go in and out, right? Platforms become popular and then they start to fade. I mean, Facebook is certainly on a decline the last couple of years. But there are some things that are timeless. And you talked about this when we originally met, was reaching out to influencers will always work.
Yes.
What else? And tell us a little bit more about how you reached out to influencers.
Yeah. So again, influencers can mean different things depending on your industry. So obviously we started in a very product heavy industry with actual tangible food. Mm-hmm. And it's the same with, if you're in e-commerce, you have a very tangible thing. So there is, influencer marketing is actually a strategy that, is very big, should be very known, where you find influencers on, whether it's on Instagram or TikTok or wherever, to actually, you gift them product and you work out some arrangement for them to actually post about you. Mm-hmm. So that's quite a known model. Yep. In coaching and services, it's for me, because I'm kind of in a particular community that calls it, the Dream 100. So this is really about they're still influencers, right? Who has, a community of an audience that is made up of your ideal clients. And can you then work your way in, or like, you know, tap into that base, because that is essentially what you want to be doing. And that's why influencer marketing is it's such a timeless strategy, because it's always about leverage. And is it the thing that's going to make you an overnight success? Like, unlikely. Especially because just creating those relationships as well just takes time, right? It's not like that's the thing. So, but it's one of those things that if you just like plan for and are strategic about, that will pay off dividends, you know, after, like, again, it's that snowball thing. It's like the more that you just keep doing it and banking that up, the more that, you know, after that time investment essentially that you put into it is going to actually pay you back. So that's why this is always the one of the number one strategies that I've always done in marketing.
Yeah. So for those of you who aren't familiar with the Dream 100, what you do is you sit down and you think about all of the people or all of the organizations that influence your target customer. And then you just make a list of the top 100. And it's hard. It's hard to come up with 100 of them. That requires you to actually go out and talk to your customers about what they read, what podcasts they listen to, whose videos are they watching on YouTube, to really, really understand who's influencing them. And then once you have that list, to start systematically thinking about how you can reach out to all of those people and find ways to collaborate with them. What are some of the different ways you can collaborate with them, Deirdre?
I mean, there are some very no-brainer ones, like being interviewed on a podcast or interviewed on live. There are some, and it kind of depends on the way that I think about it as well, is it kind of depends on where you are in that relationship, right? So, and also how can you give? Because this is the thing, you know, a lot of us go into these relationships and we're like, oh, because we want a particular outcome. That's kind of like, you know, that's probably one of the worst things that you can go into something like this thinking.
Right.
It has to always be, well, what can I give? How can I serve? And so, you know, for me, I'm always trying to be as reciprocal as possible. I have my own podcast. So if I guest on someone else's, then, you know, I'm always like, hey, do you want to come and guest on mine as well? And so that's kind of like, for me, almost like the beginning of a relationship. And then if it makes sense, and if there's a way that, you know, your services, your whatever can actually align, then how, you know, is there a way that you can do some form of JV together, collaborate together more meaningfully? So that could be like integrating, you know, a particular part of each other's courses into other's course, if that makes sense. Yeah. Can you, you know, do more meaningful things with paying clients for each other? Just, you know, what are some other ways that you can be working together? And then all the way up to like, you could actually set up a whole new offer together, you know, like that's kind of always at the very, very top. So there's a multitude of ways that you can work together, but I first start with think about how you can help, how you can serve first.
Absolutely. That's excellent advice. So on your website, you talk about your reverse stalking technique, and I was intrigued. Can you talk to us a little bit about what this means?
Yeah. So reverse stalking technique is
totally legal. It's totally legal.
It's reverse. Like you're not stalking them, they're stalking you. So it's totally legal. Okay. So the way, and this kind of comes back to the way that I think about social media now, and especially social media that is a lot more saturated. So, you know, you've heard about how I was fortunate enough to ride the wave of the growth of Instagram with my first business. But honestly, since then, and I've had multiple businesses since then, I have not been able to have that same kind of impact, you know, because it's just way too saturated now. So the way that I look at Instagram now, especially, and it could be the same for Facebook and TikTok at some stage, is how can I actually start participating? Because a lot of times as businesses, we look at these platforms as ways that we can just push. We just want to push out our stuff and have people, you know, like consume our things because, you know, of course we're putting out really valuable things. So why wouldn't they want it? But I think we have to realize that that's not what social like those platforms were built for. So that's why, you know, when you talk about the algorithms, there's a reason why sometimes you might not see your post reaching a lot of people or doing, you know, because of the fact that the platform was built for social. And so what that means is that it wants to see you be social. And what that means then is it actually wants to see you participating, not just promoting. Right. So it's kind of almost thinking differently about social media now. Yeah, of course we want to promote, but that has to come with participation. And what participation looks like is obviously engaging meaningfully, by the way, like not just a heart here and there and a love your content, you know, type thing, but like actually, you know, whatever that the conversations are that your dreamiest clients are having, like how can you participate in that conversation with them? And it also comes down to like, yeah, you're going to have to like get in front of your dreamiest clients. And again, I don't mean like in a spammy way, but you know, like they need to be able to see you. They need to be able to find you. And if you want to not leave it to chance, you have to be active with that. And so that's what I mean by, you know, you kind of like put yourself out there a lot more meaningfully. And I don't just mean by content. I mean, content is one part of it, but like use the platform to be social, to participate. And then the reverse stalking comes in because they're going to be like, oh, I wonder who this person is who's suddenly having these conversations with me. I'm going to go check them out. And hey, they have something really compelling that I'm like, that I need. And their content, you know, they're giving me an insight into exactly who they are and what they do. I do work with a lot of podcasters. So, you know, my whole, like the way that I think about it is, and sorry, just as a little bit of a detour, but, you know, I subscribe to the whole like 7-hour rule, which is that a lot of times your dreamiest clients, your customers need to have consumed or, you know, spent at least 7 hours with you. And that's why,
fascinating.
Yeah. So I uncovered that so Daniel Priestley, he has a book called Oversubscribed. And so he's first kind of coined this 7-hour rule, and it's like backed by research from Google. And that's why his example was like in Japan, business owners, they don't actually talk about business until they've spent that time together, playing golf, having dinners, all those things, because it's like build that relationship first, come to know, like, and trust each other, create that familiarity bias. And then when you talk business, it's like, it's a no-brainer, right? Like, of course we're going to work together, because why wouldn't we? So, so the way that I think about it is, how can you use your short form because social media is great at like going, like finding people and trying to bring them in. But how can you use your long form to really clock up those 7 hours? Because again, that's the way that you're really going to give them good value, really tell them your stories, really give them an insight into who you are, so that they can really like and trust you. So anyway, the reason why I detoured there was because coming back to reverse stalking technique, you know, it's like, yeah, they land on your profile, they see what you're about, they can see already the short, you know, value that you can give them. And then and one of my strategies is content honey traps, but because you've laid these really effective content honey traps where you create so much curiosity in people that they're like, I need to go listen to that podcast, I need to go hear what they're about and what they're saying, then they start to follow you through that front end funnel through. Yeah. So that's the kind of the reverse stalking technique.
Yeah, I know that. I've been lured into this before, right? I'll listen to a podcast. For example, I listened to a podcast. I heard an expert on conversion rate optimization speak. Fascinating. So then I just looked up other podcasts and realized that this particular person had their own podcast on conversion rate optimization. Listened to that and realized they'd also written a book. So downloaded the book, and you end up reverse stalking them, right? You end up looking for them. I'm like, I'm a sucker for it, apparently.
But that's just because it's just humans, like we're all suckers for it. This is just how we all work. I have multiple clients tell me that, the reason why they're working with me is because, they saw me on social media, they listened to my podcast, they came to one of my events, and then was like, of course I want to work with her.
Awesome. So Deirdre, tell us what it is that you're doing today. Give us a little spiel about your coaching, and then let us know how we could contact you if we're interested.
Yeah, for sure. So I help like coaches and consultants who have a podcast essentially monetize that on social media. So what I spoke about is pretty much like what I do. And I can do that in two ways. So one is like, here's a course, watch it, implement it. We're here for some support, but it's, everything's laid out for you. And the other way is if you are sort of a busy CEO who just wants to spend an hour and a half a week doing all the things on social media. So literally everything else is like done for you. We're not an agency in that way, but what we do is we actually plug in a system with a really cost-effective VA to actually do all the doing. So that's the other way that we can work with people.
Yeah.
And
VA is virtual assistant for those of you who are not in that lingo. Yeah.
Virtual assistant. Yeah. And if you want to contact me, you can Instagram, Deirdre Shen, come and find me, or my website is deirdreshen.com.
Well, that's a wrap. If you enjoyed this episode of Marketing Made Easy, please subscribe to Jottful's YouTube channel. That's Jottful. That way, you'll never miss an episode. We'll meet you on the next one.